Go Jackets.
What is going on, everyone, and welcome to WreckTalk. First, apologies for missing the last live show Sunday. We'll definitely be doing it this Sunday. But hey, it's Tuesday, and you know what that means. It's time for another position breakdown for the 2024 season. And today, we're going to be talking about the defensive line. Now, before we get into that, and realize I'm learning as I go. Haven't been doing it this long, but I also want to rate on like a letter grade each position group. I don't think I did that for the last two breakdowns we did. So what I want to do is say, hey, last season, what would I rate it? And then what would I rate it for this season? So if you remember, the first position group we did was linebackers. Now, that was the best position group we had on the team last year with Ely and Thomas composing, like 240-something tackles for the team, the most productive position group we had on the team. I would rate that position group an A for last season. And this season, I would probably rate it a B-. There's just some unknowns. I mean, it's unlikely you're going to replace the production you had out of those, even though I think Braylon Oliver, Andre White, and Trinilius Tatum are more than capable of playing their brains out this season. I would have to rate it at a B-. And for the tight end group, I mean, for last season, I have to rate it an F. It was the worst position group we had on the team last year, and it wasn't even close. Now, this season, there's no way I think we could be worse than last year. We do bring in Brett Seether and Jackson Long, and Buster Faulkner will be coaching the tight ends. I would have to rate it a C-, though. So I think we take a big step up, but probably still one of the I would say least productive groups we'll have on the team this year, especially with all the talent we've brought in at tight end and running back. Now, there's a ton to be excited about with Georgia Tech football right now. We just signed another 4-star in Troy Stevenson. He's a defensive back, and also safety Christian Pritchett, who's a 3-star, which brings us to on both Rivals and 247. We have the 18th ranked recruiting class in the country, and I know that's not dropping stuff here. That's not super impressive maybe to some of these other teams, but for where Georgia Tech has been the last 3 years with a total coaching staff change, and with the class we had last year, I think this is better than I could have imagined us being it this year. I was just kind of hoping to be in the top 30, and we're doing about twice as well as that. Now, will it slide probably into the 20s? Yeah, probably. But again, this is phenomenal what Brent Key and staff have been able to do up to this point in the season. So let's look at what are we replacing on the defensive line. Now, this is a position group I'm not going to go through every person on the roster. There's 19 kids on the roster, and looking at the previous breakdowns I did, I get it. Someone did comment. It seems a little dry, a little boring. I get that. So let's just hit, the high notes, players that are going to be playing, maybe not as much detail. Biggest player we're going to be replacing on the defensive line, obviously Keon White. Keon White played his brains out last year. In previous seasons, this is a kid that came from Old Dominion, a kid that, Alabama, LSU were trying to get, was plagued with injuries up to last season, was able to stay healthy last season. He was third in teams in total tackles, only behind Ely and Thomas last season with 54. So we have a ton to replace on defense. Thomas accounted for 118 tackles, Ely 112, Keon White 54. That's 284 tackles to replace on defense. Obviously, he goes number 46 overall in the second round of the New England Patriots, and I can't wait to see what he's able to do in the NFL. Now, if you don't count Jahmyr Gibbs, he was the only player to be drafted. Thomas and I can't remember if Ely found his way on a team, but I think Thomas found his way to a team. E.J. Jenkins, I think, is with the Giants or Jets, one of the New York teams, but he was the only one to be drafted in last year's draft. Now, we also lose, and this really irritates me, and this is why we have some payback to give Ole Miss this year. People are going to say, oh, this is sour grapes, you're just complaining. This was 100% tampering with this kid. Akilo Stone, he won an accolade as like the best defensive lineman in the spring game, a kid that didn't see much playing time at all up till last season. So I imagine through proxy, Ole Miss had someone reach out to this kid, offer him an NIL deal, saw that he was on the up and up, and now he's going to Ole Miss. He accounted for 12 tackles and a sack last season. So those two definitely hurt. But we'll look at who we're bringing in. I think we might, be okay. Obviously, you can't replace Keon White. TK Chimedza, I'm assuming he graduated. He's not listed on the 2024 roster. He accounted for 6 total tackles last year. And then I don't know if you guys remember Christian Burkhaler. I think that's how you say his name. I'm having trouble reading my own writing. It's early in the morning. Before work, I'm trying to get this done. He's a kid that transferred from UCLA, came in with 3 years of eligibility. I didn't see any stats for him. On his Twitter, he's listed as a tight end and outside linebacker, so I don't really know what happened with the kid. I don't know if he transfer portaled out, if he's even still on the team, but he's not listed on the 2024 roster. Not much to say about that. Gray Carroll did hit the transfer portal. He ended up at Liberty. He's a defensive end. I didn't see any stats for him either. And I'm not dogging any of these kids, but as far as replacing production, didn't see any stats for him. KJ Miles transferred to Temple. Both of these kids were 3 stars. Carroll out of Tennessee, and then KJ Miles out of New Jersey. Daniel Carson, 3-star from Missouri, transfers to Texas. And then Jalen McDonald. I couldn't really figure with him either. He's not listed on the 2024 roster. When I look on his Twitter, he's tweeting a bunch of Furman stuff, so I don't know if he's transferred to Furman in South Carolina. Didn't see anything. On 247, he's still listed as being at Tech, though, again, he's not on the 2024 roster. So, are losing a good bit as far as number. There's 8 kids that have either graduated, been drafted, or have hit the portal. Now, who's coming in? Big one. Big one is Marco Coleman. So Marco Coleman comes in 2019 with Brent Key in the first year under Jeff Collins. And I know I dog Collins a lot, and I think it's warranted, but I think he was able to get some really good people on staff with him. Like I said, comes in 2019 with Key. He leaves after the 2019 season. Now, he was able to increase the production at defensive line. In 2021, though, took a step back, ends up leaving along with Tashard Choice. Tashard Choice goes to Texas. Marco Coleman goes to Michigan State for a single season. Now, there's a From the Rumble Seat article that has a coaching profile on him, which is where I'm getting some of this information. It looks like Michigan State, though, took a step back, though they were plagued with injury on the defensive line. But he did hit some big-name recruits for them in the single year he was there. Comes back this year, which makes you think how horrible, or I won't even say how horrible, but how much he must have disagreed with Collins' coaching philosophy. Comes back this year. Seems like Tech is the place that he wants to be. And obviously, he's a Georgia Tech great. This is a guy that was on the 1990 national title team, played for 2 years at Tech. So in the previous profiles, we talked about national title rings. So let's just recap that real quick. Obviously, I did the two videos on Brent Key. Brent Key has 2 national title rings with Alabama. Kevin Scher, co-defensive coordinator and linebacker coach, also has 2 national title rings with Alabama. We talked about tight ends. That's coached by Buster Faulkner now. Has 2 national title rings with UGA, and Marco Coleman with a national title ring, and the sweetest one with the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets, which brings it to 7. That's 7 national title rings on staff, and we've only been through, this is the 3rd video of these. So also had a very successful NFL career. He was picked 12th overall in the 1992 draft, and he had 520 total tackles, 65.5 sacks, and 18 forced fumbles in the NFL. So this is a guy that knows the defensive line group, a guy that played at the heights of this position group. And that's the thing. When you can show a kid, hey, here's my national title ring with Georgia Tech, and I had 65.5 sacks in the NFL. I think we're in fantastic hands with Marco Coleman. I think one of my Friday videos will also be probably after I do all the position group videos, like ranking or rating the coaches on like a letter grade. But man, huge to have Marco Coleman back on staff. I mean, look at what he's already doing. We've signed one of the 4 stars we have in this class. CJ Jackson, I think the highest rated recruit we have on the board right now. Dude is already doing work. So, player-wise, who do we have coming in? Biggest name, Edanosa Rubin, nickname ET, coming in from Clemson. Has 2 years of eligibility left. He's 6'3", 295 pounds, redshirt junior, wearing number 6. Now, this is a kid that's really, I guess, a hybrid defensive tackle, defensive end player, which is going to work out nicely for us. We'll talk about later on in the video. Probably our weakest, one of our biggest weaknesses on this team is at defensive tackle. After Collins leaves and Thacker is able to really run the defense how he wants to, we switch into a 4-3 scheme. So now we have 4 defensive linemen. And that seemed to work out way better for us. So I imagine this is a guy that's obviously going to start. And I think that he's going to play both defensive end and defensive tackle, depending on where we need him. I imagine we're going to have to deal with players being banged up and injury, so he'll switch between defensive tackle and defensive end. Even if we don't have, any injury issues, that'll still be the case. Now, he played in 30 games at Clemson. Let's see. He played from 2019 to 2022, had 3.5 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks, pass breakup, blocked field goal, and 318 snaps there. As a recruit, he was a 3-star number 31 defensive end prospect, and as a transfer, he's also a 3-star number 32. This is a kid that we really need to come in and have a big year for us in the way that Keon White did. Is this the guy that can really fill the shoes of a Keon White? We can't have, a scenario with him like we did with Antonius Clayton. Like Antonius Clayton, one of the few 5 stars that have ever played at Tech. And I don't know what happened with him. He transferred him from Florida and just I don't know if he took more than 20 snaps in his entire time at Tech. I doubt that's going to happen, especially with Marco Coleman and Brent Key at the helm. I imagine this kid is going to have a really good year for us. Now, we also bring in Eddie Kelly from the University of South Florida. Another big kid, 6'4", 274 pounds. He's a sophomore wearing number 97. from Orlando, Florida. He will have 3 years of eligibility left. Played in 11 games as a true freshman, had 19 total tackles, 1.5 tackles for loss, and a fumble recovery. Now, as a recruit, he was a 3-star 85, number 137 defensive lineman in the nation. Didn't see him rated on 247 as a transfer. Now, this is a kid that looks like, physically has everything you need to play, well at Tech. Has some speed. Another kid that looks like he could play both defensive tackle and defensive end, depending on what Georgia Tech needs. Now, on the recruiting side, we bring in 3 players with, just how many people we have on rosters at defensive linemen. I think 2 of them will probably redshirt, and because of the weakness we have at defensive tackle, really in size, I think one of them will be rotated in. So we have Shameik Jones, big kid, 6'5", 255 pounds, 3-star. He wasn't the highest rated recruit. He was one of the highest rated recruits in the 2022 class out of Camden, South Carolina. Number 76 defensive lineman in the country, a kid we flipped from App State. Another kid that is kind of this hybrid defensive end, not defensive end, defensive tackle, but really defensive end linebacker hybrid. Like I said, I imagine that this is a kid that's going to take a red shirt this year. Not the case, though, with Bryson Dixon, 6'3", one of the 2 kids we had out of Leroy, Alabama, 330 pounds, 3-star, 85, number 158 defensive lineman in the country. This is a kid I really, because, we're undersized at defensive tackle. In fact, he would be one of only 2 kids at defensive tackle that are 300-plus pounds, along with Zeke Biggers. I think this kid is gonna get rotated in, and it would really be nice to see him have a nice season as a true freshman. Last kid out of that recruiting class, Malcolm Pugh, the other kid out of Leroy, Alabama. He's 6'4", 215 pounds, probably the lightest kid at defensive lineman right now. He was a 3-star, 86. Excuse me. Number 120th defensive lineman in the country. Like I said, I imagine him and Shameik Jones will be redshirted for this season. Now, kids that, let me just say it this way, how I think this is going to fall out. So, I think in conjunction with E.T., Edanosa Rubin, and I'm probably going to butcher this name, Sylvania Yanjuan, number 32, is going to start and swap in and out with Edanosa Rubin at defensive end. He was a reserve behind Keon White last year, 6'4", 257 pounds senior. This is a kid from Belgium, and Tech has always done well with like these European players. Adam Godsis was another kid that played defensive line for us. I think he was from Australia. Ends up getting drafted in the 2nd round years ago by the Broncos and had a pretty good NFL career. I don't even think he had really played football until he was like 16 years old. So Yanduan sounds like, he could be one of those type players. Last year accounted for 23 total tackles, 5 tackles for loss, and 2.5 sacks. He was a 3-star out of high school. This is one of the kids I really look to take a big step up and have a really good year this season. Now, on the other side at defensive end, I believe Kyle Kennard is going to start. He started last year. He's tall kid, 6'5", 240 pounds. He's an Atlanta kid, played at Riverwood High School, and he was behind Keon White in tackles last year with 35 total tackles, 4.5 tackles for loss, and 2 sacks. I don't know if more so than anyone, but I think this is a kid that if he takes a big step up, we're gonna be okay. We're gonna have really good production out of our defensive ends to get pressure on the quarterback this year. Now, From the Rumble seat has like 5 breakout players, like a little series of articles they're doing. Andre White was one of them we've already mentioned. Another one is defensive tackle Daquan Dallas, 6'2", 282-pound kid from Savannah. Had 26 total tackles last year, 5.5 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks, 2 forced fumbles. Second in production at tackle wise on the defensive line. He was a 3-star, number 98 defensive end. And in that article, they talked about him really improving in the second half of the season once, we moved. Like, because he's undersized as a tackle, playing him at nose guard, he didn't do well at. But having him, outside the center playing with another tackle in a 4 defensive line front, he did much better, particularly Virginia Tech and North Carolina. He was pretty pivotal in those wins. And him along with Zeke Biggers on the defensive line, we really need to be stout. And it's not like you don't have to have, a ton of tackles or a bunch of sacks, but can you just plug up the line there and force things outside where Tatum, White, or Oliver can clean it up, and we can prevent some big plays there. And I like what Nick Saban said a while ago. In a press conference, he was asked, like, well, you didn't get a bunch of sacks this game, or in the past few games you haven't really gotten, to the quarterback that much. But if you're hurrying the quarterback, if he can't go through his progression, if he only has, 2-3 seconds to throw the ball, even if he's getting it off, that's affecting the quarterback, and that's limiting what the offense can do, especially like you look at, that was a big thing with North Carolina last year. Now, I think Keon White alone had 3 sacks in that game, but hurrying the quarterback is affecting the quarterback. Daquan Dallas, I think this defensive line really rests on his shoulders. If we can get the production out of him, plugging up the middle of the front, I think we're going to have a good year on defense. Now, probably starting at the other tackle is Makia Scott, 6'4", 295-pound kid out of Gainesville, Georgia. He's a redshirt junior. Gainesville, kind of another football factory in Georgia. This is where the Sims kid that played at Alabama at quarterback, Deshaun, God, why can't I remember his name? Kid that played at Clemson. Sorry, it's early in the morning. Ended up winning a national title with them. Came out of there. Anyways, accounted for 22 tackles last season, 2.5 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks, 3-star, 88, number 45 defensive tackle in his class. Another kid that if him along with Daquan Dallas can just plug up the middle of the field and force the ball, into White, Oliver, Tatum's hands, we're going to be okay. Now, probably being rotated in, and he would probably start otherwise. I think, with his size, there might be some conditioning, he would play better being rotated in as Zeke Biggers, big kid, 6'6", 341 pounds from Salisbury, North Carolina. He's a junior. The biggest kid on this offensive line, counted for 32 tackles, 1 tackle for loss last year. He was a 3-star coming out of high school. This is the kid I'm probably the most interested in this year. I think Zeke Biggers has the potential to really step up and affect an offense this season. Look out for this kid, number 88, Zeke Biggers. Now, others that I think will be rotated in with regularity, I already talked about the recruit. At defensive end, Noah Collins, 6'5", 243-pound sophomore, number 43. Defensive tackle Jason Moore, who's 6'2", 291 pounds, redshirt freshman. Hopefully we can get a little bit more weight on him. He's young, but I think Marco Coleman with him can make him an effective reserve player. He's number 95. Number 27 defensive end Josh Robinson played last year, along with Zeke Biggers, the tallest kid, 6'6", 259 pound sophomore. So, I guess in conclusion, what's going on with the defensive line? Well, like we talked about earlier, I look for Zeke Biggers and Daquan Dallas to really step up and take charge of the interior defensive line. We need Edanosa Rubin as a transfer to come in and be very productive, probably playing that hybrid defensive tackle, defensive end role. June at defensive end in conjunction with Rubin. Really need them to step up and affect the quarterback, along with Makia Scott at the end. If all of these kids, if Coleman can get all of these kids really playing at their potential, where you can't just double team one of them or it's going to open up another, someone on the end. If you double team one, it opens up the tackle. We could have a good year on defense. I think that if just half of these kids take major steps up, that is what will be required to have a 6-win or more season. If we really struggle here and these kids don't develop like we would like them to, I think it's going to be very difficult to make a bowl next year and achieve that same level of success on defense we had last year. Now, on the starting front, I think Daquan Dallas and Makia Scott are going to – I misspoke earlier. Makia Scott, not a defensive end. But those two kids will start at defensive tackle. Zeke Biggers will rotate in with Jason Moore. June and E.T. will rotate in. You could almost say as co-starters at defensive end. And let me look back through here. Kyle Kennard starting at the other defensive end with the kid from South Florida rotating in, and Jason Moore rotating in on both sides of the defensive ends. Now, like I said, I think the defensive tackle is probably the weakest spot on this front. We're just undersized there. So hopefully we can use some speed to our advantage there. We're getting pressure on the quarterback out of the interior. So let's rate this group. Last year, we had one of the best defensive linemen we've had in some time with Keon White. Was third in team in tackles. I would rate us a C. We had, like I said, a lot of production out of Keon, but just looking at it as a whole and with the talent that we had last year there, I would probably rate us a C. This year, with bringing in Edanosa Rubin and Eddie Kelly out of South Florida and bringing Coleman back on staff, able to develop those kids and the kids we already have on the roster, I would probably rate us at a B-. So not a full letter grade up, but almost. And I think we would have to play at that B- level or better if we want to have a shot at making a bowl or better. So tell me what you guys think. In the comments, what do you think, or what are your expectations of the defensive line? Also, if you're not a member of the channel, that comes with some benefits. There's going to be some members-only content coming up in the future. You also get to recommend a video. You get special emojis in the live chat. If you want to donate to the channel, obviously, I've invested a ton of money into the channel. We're doing a lot of cool things. There's a PayPal link and a Cash App link in the description. Thank you, everyone who has donated. And y'all have a great rest of the day. Go Jackets, and to hell with Georgia.